in his bag of tricks was that he was one of the best human beings, one of the warmest human beings that any of us are going to know. And I know that my knowledge of Montgomery's started with Wes, and it started in a way that should have warned me what kind of rarefied atmosphere I was going to be in dealing with any of these people. But an artist that I was beginning to have some success with in the old days at Riverside, a man named Cannonball Adderley, came busting into my office one day, having just gotten back from playing a gig in Indianapolis. And what he said to me basically was, there's this guitar player out there, we've got to get him for the label. And I was most impressed in that language of his, by his use of the word we. Because if you've spent as much time hanging around with jazz musicians as I have, you'll know that it's not too frequent when they think of themselves and the record company and the people that are running the record company as we. But you know, and I suspect that if I have had success as a producer, I've had it primarily because I was able to con these guys into feeling that they were my friends and I was their friend, and it worked. And there are a lot of remarkable things that one has to remember about Buddy and his brothers. One of the most dramatic is the fact that all three Montgomerys were deathly afraid of flying. And it took trickery and bravery and all kinds of things to ever get any of those Montgomery brothers into a plane. There's one classic story about Buddy that I wasn't there, but I'll never doubt it, because the man who told me the story, a wonderful piano player named Wynton Kelly, had been seated next to Buddy in a plane. What had happened was Miles Davis had reconstituted his band at this point and had Wynton playing piano. And incidentally, so for people who get confused about similarities in names, the reason that there's a guy in the scene today called Wynton Marsalis is because his father was a piano player, and when he was born, the story goes, Mrs. Marsalis said, because Wynton was thinking about possibly, naming his son that, naming him after himself in effect, but he was kind of hesitant about it, and Mrs. Marsalis said, if you don't let me name that boy Wynton, I'll name him Kelly. So that's how Wynton Marsalis came along, but that wasn't what I was talking about. I'm talking about Wynton Kelly sitting in a plane next to Buddy Montgomery, and they're starting a taxi. They're going to be flying to Europe, where Buddy Montgomery will be making his debut with the Miles Davis Band. And the way I heard the story was Buddy sat there for a few minutes and then leaped out of his seat and started to run forward and said, plane is taxiing, and he said, I can't do it, you've got to let me out of here. And they let him out, and so Buddy Montgomery never did play with Miles Davis.
In Europe, yeah.
But it is a wonderful story to recall. But Buddy, Buddy being the younger brother, I guess, youngest brother, kind of had to maintain a tradition that nobody in the family wanted to, or as it ended up, could read music. Right. When you're wondering at all the remarkable attributes of the Montgomery brothers, include the fact that they couldn't read music. And I think a few of you sitting out there recognize what kind of a handicap this can be. But Buddy, you know, he took it to the opposite extreme. I know that I was involved in a situation once, a record date that I was doing. The leader was Bobby Hutcherson, and I won't name the man who was supposed to be the piano player on the date, because that would be cruel. He's still around, a very fine player, but something went wrong, and he didn't show up. And we went into a panic mode, and we were making phone calls and desperately trying to contact somebody who we could get to come in and take over, because for various schedule reasons and whatnot, if we didn't get that record date done right then, I doubt if we ever would have gotten it done. And got a hold of Buddy, convinced him. Buddy, this was during Buddy's Oakland period, of course, and we were recording at the Fantasy Studios in Berkeley, and Buddy came over and he said, you know, of course, you know, I can't read this stuff. And Hutcherson, being a very practical man, asked him to just stand there, and Bobby sat down at the piano, played a tune through once, played it through twice, at which point Buddy knew the damn thing as well as anybody in the world ever could or would. And this happened about 3 or 4 times that afternoon. And, you know, I had always heard about the remarkable, intuitive way that Buddy played. I'd never been exposed to it in that direct a way. And I would say I'd always been a Buddy Montgomery fan, but from that moment on, I was convinced that there wasn't anything he couldn't do. That was an exaggeration. There are some things he couldn't do, but we all know a lot of the things that he could do, and I'm just very pleased to be part of this tribute to this guy who was, he was a lot of things. He obviously was a good family man. We've heard some references to that here already tonight. He was a wonderful musician, and he was one of the best friends anybody could hope to have. And that's all I have to say on the subject.